Hi, my name is TK Monzon. I am from Whittier First Day. I am actually the outreach nurse there. So Whittier First Day is, again, a homeless services organization. We're part of a larger collaborative called Gateway Connections in Spot 7. We are paired, work collaboratively with our sister organization, PATH, people assisting the homeless, or Helpline Youth Council, at Our Place Housing Solution in the city of Long Beach. So our charting. So going back to the review, if you haven't go look at that one, I know it's a little long and this might be a little long. So I'm trying to talk really fast so that way you can get more. Try to get this, the goal is to get this under 15 minutes, and here we go. So last charting review, you want the charting really, or documenting is really a summary of your actions, the things that you have done for your client prior to all that wonderful stuff that you recorded for the client during your interactions with them. It also helps in terms of data quality and maybe even bring funding, because it brings to light, hey, here's a need, and can you give me money to help this need for this client? Your charting will help with that. As it will be read by many, your boss, your colleagues, lawyers, and other continuum of care that you will be referring clients to. Charting is done on HMIS, and that's the LA Homeless Management Information System, or your current organization charting system. For us, it would be Google Docs, and we'll go over that later. Generally, charting is more methodical, so the nice charting actually follows kind of a simple formula. You have the assessment, the intervention, and an evaluation, which we'll go over. So when you're reading a charting, there's times where you're just reading. You have a client you've been working with for about 2 years. So there's a lot of interactions there. So if it's a narrative form, you're going to be having to read through a lot of the client's interactions for, let's say if there's like 450 entries, and it's a narrative, you're going to be reading through a lot of them. And that's not very time consuming. That is time consuming. But like narratives and other charting systems like SOAPy and F-DAR and other charting types, they're more easy to, you want one that's easy to read. You want one that flows easily and it's time efficient to do or manage. Sometimes we're stuck at charting for we're seeing the client 15 minutes and then we're charting the next 15 minutes on them. You want a charting time way less than that. You want it to be charted on time, because of the fact it consumes so much. Myself, I'm guilty of that. I'm going to put it off by doing more interactions, which require more charting. So it's a self-masochistic cycle, I guess. Because it is for data quality purposes or funding, even legal binding, because we don't like to get sued, you do want your charting to be you want the charting to be as detailed and accurate as possible. You want it also to be relevant. You're doing work on a client for getting their driver's license, and all of a sudden like you note that their favorite color is blue. That should not be in depending on whatever, unless you try to explain somehow that that's relevant to the entry, go ahead, but otherwise you may want to just leave it out. Professional, you want charting to be professional. You don't want to have opinions about the client. The client is stupid. The client is good looking. The client has nice muscles. The client is mean. Those are opinionated. Those are opinions that won't really contribute much to the charting from another reader. So the most effective charting so far that I've kind of come across and we would like to see is F-DAR charting. F-DAR, there's really 4 focuses on it, and it really makes charting much easier and more time effective. There's four parts to it. You have the focus, data, which are your assessments, self-reports, actions, which are your interventions, and your evaluations or your responses to the client's responses and to the action performed. And going in there more to quickly kind of go over it, and we'll go over it really more. We'll really go over it. Is this in paper? Apart from the margins kind of being too wide, this really is what it looks like. So you have your focus, your data here, your data here, your actions here, and your response here. Not all the time they will be the same. So sometimes you'll just have a focus one and it'll be just an R. You're reevaluating it, and that altogether is fine. Or you have a separate A, or you have a separate D. So long as the subject is very relevant, it kind of paints a picture that it kind of makes the documentation flow. So going over in detail, your focus is it's very organized. It's the overall subject of the note and the kind of the guiding chain. So whatever you put here and subsequent interactions that are related to that, you would put in the focus. So for example, getting the client a birth certificate, and the focus is birth certificate, and you may have and on the side it would be all three DAR, or it could be just a D and the reason why the client can't get a birth certificate, or the client is ready to get a birth certificate or whatever, or an interaction somewhere in the future you assisted the client in getting a birth certificate, or like maybe like 2 weeks down the line the client received the birth certificate in the mail, and then you get the response. But all should in the focus should be birth certificate, if that makes sense, because they all relate to your actions all relate to one subject. Because of that, the focus really makes the overall thing easy to read and organize and very simple. So if you have 4,500 charting entries on this one client, you may want to have a subject line, versus if it's just through narrative, you're gonna have a hard time trying to sort through each one. Or especially you may have like a general idea of what time around the time frame that you've given it, but let's say you were sick and you needed your coworker needed to take over, then they're going to have a hard time trying to find that charting. It makes things really it's overall the reason of the interaction. So your data, there's two types of data. You have your subjective and your objective. So your subjective is more assessments that are unquantifiable. You can't put a number, or it can't be measured really. So those are things that the client self-reports. They are also things that the client self-reports outside of the interaction. So for example, the client is cold, or the client says he has high blood sugar. You can't, unless you have the tools to have to measure the blood sugar, you're just going to have to take the word of the client. Not to say that it's true or false, but you just want to report that it gotten reported. The client went to the doctor last Wednesday. Those are things that reported outside the interaction, versus client is at doctor's office right now, and you're at the doctor's office with them. That's more objective because you've observed those. Feelings in quotes, client feels sad, client says, I hate whoever because they are mean to me. Those are some may be relevant to the charting or the interaction. Here I would even put the client requests. So for example, and some would argue it can go into the focus part, and it can, because it's something that's very relevant. Their objectives, the objective assessments, they're more measurable or quantifiable. The client has a fever of 99.2, and because you had a thermometer and just measured it, the client received a letter of GR, got 225 out of it, and that's because he got a letter with 225. It's something that's documented. There's some proof or tangible proof or some kind of measurable. You took a device or you got some sort of evidence that states that's what it is. Observable at the time of interaction. The client is bleeding. I mean, you can measure the amount of blood, but generally you can definitely see that the client is bleeding, or the client is agitated, or the client is crying. Those are very objective things. Um, what the client is crying about, that becomes more in the subjective realm. You don't, when you're making it, so there's really no assumptions to be made. I mean, actually, in general your assessments, there should be no assessments, diagnoses, or personal opinions or conclusions should be made. What that really looks like, for example, is if a client's experience, like the client is talking to you and he seems high. You don't want to say the client is high, or the client is the client is a drug addict, or you can say client reports history of drug use, um, or like if the client is exhibiting like that, he's intoxicated. You can say that, for example, from alcohol, you can say alcohol found near client's hand, in client's hand. Client is slurred speech, flushed. Smells of alcohol. It doesn't really give the picture. It gives the picture that the client is kind of intoxicated, but you don't want to directly state it, because those things kind of open you up for libel or liability. Overall, they should also be focused and somewhat relative to the. Actually, well, it's either or, but I would like for them to be relevant to the subject or the focus. Your actions really are more your action verbs, your verbs. You you instructed the client to have some kind of life skill. You performed some kind of service. You gave the client a hygiene kit. You a referral. So you gave the client a referral to his primary care, or a referral to whatever substance abuse program. Those are things that you've done, or the clients did themselves. You want to be very descriptive. You want to be mindful of time frames. So client transported to GR took 20 minutes or whatever. Client had, for possessions, for example, client had something expensive. You may want to make note of that. So if the client had like a $4,500 gold bar or whatever, you may want to know noted client had gold bar entering truck, and noted client and going into DPSS building with gold bar. Noted client that did not have gold bar or whatever, because that may be opening us to liability, because the client can go back and say like, hey, you didn't you stole my gold bar, whereas reality is like, well, nope, I double checked and you had your gold bar over. You went into the gold bar. You went into the DPSS with the gold bar and came out without it. Um, and then your responses. Your response really is what happened to the patient, how they react to the change or your actions. It's just more of the evaluation of the response. You want further action required. You want one that's relevant to both the data and the action itself. You don't want to just say like, you're writing this awesome chart about taking them to the DMV, and all of a sudden the client, you start writing about their mental health. That's somewhat irrelevant. However, you can put future goals where you could say client wants to address mental health next or something. Things to note. And that you will have, I mean, not all interactions have an assessment, intervention, and a response right away. So yes, not theoretically, yes, definitely you can have a focus on, and then on the one column is just a D, or a focus of the same subject is an A. So long as they are tied to us, the subjects are all the same, then yes, they can theoretically be there. And in a way, you don't want to, it avoids charting redundantly. Standalone assessments that don't require action or evaluations. Those are things that you may want to be. Those are some things exactly that can be standalone. So phone calls, or follow up on the phone, or like you called and left a message, or yeah, those are really things that don't require evals or actions, or just independent from each other. So going back to this charting here in a regular charting, in the next video, I'll probably go over what it looks like in terms of our organization. If that's like relevant to you, otherwise it stops here. So you have your focus, your D. So all your subjective and objective data are in here, and your action. So all the things, so transported client, client states he is anxious because of fear, what he's kind of feeling at the present time. And then what did I had to do is instructed to take medication, some teaching involved. I tried to resolve the problems that his anxieties and barriers. And then the response, what happened to them? The client, maybe this looked like it happened all day, received 225 monthly, CalFresh. And then his next goal is he wants to make referral to PCP. So generally, that's really what charting, effective charting, or F-DAR charting is. We have been so far kind of good for it in transition. So yeah, let me know, and thank you.